And you will talk about quantum computing. What do you need? Clicker? There's one here. There's another one. Okay, så er vi klar til at gå videre. Det vi skal snakke om nu, det er, hvordan man beskytter sig mod en kvantecomputer. Kvantecomputeren den har været i pipeline i årevis. Nu skulle det måske igen være klar på ret start. Det første, man selvfølgelig vil bruge den til, det er at bryde krypteringen på folks forskellige mails. Welcome to Hannah Bøck. Protect, som vil fortælle om udgangspunkt i Protecting Against Tomorrow's Adversaries Post-Quantum Cryptography.
Yeah. Hello. I'm going to talk about post-quantum cryptography, which is how we're going to protect our communication in a possible future where quantum computers exist. So, the story about quantum computers starts in 1982, when Richard Feynman had the idea that you may be able to use some effects from quantum physics to do calculations. And Feynman back then thought about using this to simulate some problems in physics which are very hard or impossible to simulate on a normal computer because it's just too slow. So Feynman found out that there are certain problems where you can use quantum mechanics to solve them much faster than on a normal computer. Then in 1994, a researcher called Peter Shor found out that if you had such a quantum computer, you could also use that to attack cryptography, and specifically public key cryptography. And then this became something about encryption. A quantum computer is a hypothetical device which can calculate some things much faster, but we don't have quantum computers yet. They exist in theory, and the theory is well understood, but it's very hard to build them in practice because you need to have a very tight control over single particles. They could exist in the future, and there are some researchers who say it may be as soon as in maybe 10 or 15 years that we could see these quantum computers, or that we could see large-scale quantum computers. I mean, right now there are some experimental ones which are very small and very limited, but yeah. Post-quantum cryptography is just a term for cryptography where we believe that it's resistant to attacks with quantum computers. And the development is still in very early stages. First, let's talk about the easy part, which is symmetric cryptography, which is when you have like the same key to encrypt or decrypt something, and it also kind of relates to hash functions. And there it's relatively easy. Quantum computers can, in theory, can speed up the attacks a little bit, but not too much. So if you have a bit longer keys, then everything's fine. So you can just use 256 bits, which is, there are standardized algorithms which you can use, and they are safe against quantum computers. Now, when it gets to public key cryptography, things get a bit more complicated. So public key cryptography is that includes encryption mechanisms where you have a public and a private key. You may know this from PGP, where you have like a public key that you can give to everyone and a private key that you keep for yourself. It also includes digital signatures, where you have a private key to sign something and a public key to verify something. And it also includes key exchanges, which is what's usually used for things like TLS or SSH, or also messaging systems. All of this public key cryptography that we use today is based on three different problems. One is factoring, which means we have a large number that's a product of primes, and it's very hard to find these primes if the number is large enough. And that's the basis of the RSA algorithm. And then there are algorithms based on the so-called discrete logarithm problem, which is the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and which is DSA and El-Gamal, although they are not really used that much anymore. And there's elliptic curve cryptography, which is also a discrete logarithm problem, but in elliptic curves, which is some kind of mathematical structure. The important thing is that a quantum computer can attack all these three things. So all the public key cryptography we have today is broken. So this affects basically all the software that's doing cryptography, whether it's TLS to access web pages securely, whether it's GPG, or also Signal, or WhatsApp, OTR, like all the encryption protocols we use today are basically broken. So we need something new that protects against these quantum attacks. And there are a number of different fields of cryptography where people investigate possibilities for new algorithms. And this is a list of them. You don't have to remember these names. It's just like these are mathematical fields where you could derive new crypto algorithms from. Now, if you say today you want to protect against quantum attacks, you can in theory do that. So there are algorithms where we are reasonably confident that they are secure and that they will stay secure even against quantum attacks. So there's a paper with recommendations from an EU research project, and they recommend something called McBits for encryption. The problem with that is it has a key size of 1 megabyte, which is very uncomfortable. Like, for example, if you're surfing to a web page, it usually gives you its key. So you would have to download 1 megabyte before you can even access the web page. So that's not really very comfortable. And there are signatures. There's an algorithm called Sphinx, which is a hash-based algorithm, which is from the security perspective, it's very good because its security is based on a hash function, and hash functions are very well understood. So we totally know how to build a secure hash function, and we can use a secure hash function to build a signature scheme from it. The problem with that is that these signatures are 42 kilobytes. That may not sound that much, but if you look how a TLS handshake works today, like just you're surfing to Google or something, then usually there are between 5 and 10 signatures that go over the wire. So that adds up. So that's also not practical. But if you say you have a very strong need to have something secure that you can build today, then these are the algorithms you would use. And then there's stuff that's a bit more experimental, and the thing that most people are currently looking at are lattices, and there are a whole range of algorithms. So there's Entrue, which is already quite old, and the problem with it is that it's patented, and basically the best way to prevent your algorithm from being used is to file a patent for it, because nobody wants to use cryptography with patents. And there's ring learning with errors and a variation of it, which is called New Hope, which is kind of currently the hot topic of post-quantum cryptography. And there are some other ones. And there are schemes for both encryption, signatures, and also key exchanges. And this is much more practical, so it's reasonably fast. It has relatively small keys. And I say relatively because they are still in the range of 6 kilobytes, which is still bigger than anything we had before, but you can handle that. A problem, as I said, problem one, some of these things are patented, and another problem is that this is still not settled science. This is still very much in flux, where people have debates what's secure and how do we need to exactly do that it is secure. But these are probably the most likely candidates for the first post-quantum systems that will be used. And then there's something relatively new, which is called super singular isogenies over elliptic curves. Sounds like complicated math, and it also is complicated math. This scheme has very small keys, and you can do a key exchange. And what's kind of nice about it is that it's very similar to Diffie-Hellman. So it's kind of very similar to something we already know. But it's extremely experimental, and right now I wouldn't bet on the security of that. So there's still a lot more research needed to see whether this is actually secure. And so kind of the conclusion of this is that right now you have to choose between something that's completely impractical and something that's very experimental and where you do not really know whether it's secure. If we're looking at what's happening in crypto today, then there have been a number of attacks. Like one thing is that attacks these days have logos and nice names, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. But these 4 attacks I have on the slides here are attacks against crypto from the 90s. It's mostly like that. Some of it is because in the 90s there was some regulation that strong crypto is kind of like weapons, and there were export restrictions. And the problem is we still have security issues because in the 90s people built insecure crypto systems. And what that tells us is that it's very hard to get rid of old insecure crypto. So it often takes decades to get rid of crypto that is bad. For example, like there are still a lot of people who care that their web page can be accessed with Windows XP and Internet Explorer on Windows XP, because that's a significant market in some areas of the world. So people want to keep compatibility with very old systems, but we also want to get rid of insecure cryptography. And if quantum computers come in 10 or 15 years, then we can be sure that this will be quite rough, because like if that happens, we basically have to break a lot of compatibility. So it will be tough to make that change. And also something to consider is that it's not just that we need a secure algorithm, but there are also often like many issues how you exactly use an algorithm. And something I think that illustrates this quite well is that just last month there were 3 research papers on parameters of Diffie-Hellman. Now Diffie-Hellman is the oldest public key encryption algorithm at all. It basically was invented with this algorithm in the 70s. So this, and still in 2016, we're having debates how to implement Diffie-Hellman in a secure way. So if we cannot really agree how to use Diffie-Hellman secure, which is the oldest public key algorithm at all, then how should we handle these new algorithms, which will have completely new problems and which need to be researched? And then and this is a bit scary. So in theory, an attacker could just say today, okay, I will just store a lot of encrypted communication, and then maybe in some decades I may decrypt it when I have a quantum computer. And we know that from the Snowden revelations that the NSA is storing a lot of data. The capabilities exist. It's not that costly, like hard disks are cheap. So you may be even worried to use cryptography that can be broken in the future if you use it today. So this is a strong argument to say, okay, even if quantum computers are far in the future, we may want to use these post-quantum algorithms today. And some things are already happening in that space. And so Google recently announced that they are implementing New Hope, which is one of these lattice algorithms in Chrome. Now you might say, okay, but how do we know if this is secure? And the answer is we don't. But what Google is doing is quite smart. They are saying, okay, we use something that we believe is secure, not against quantum computers, but which is secure today, and which is well tested and well researched. And then we combine that with this new post-quantum thing and use both together. And so even if one of them breaks, then we still have the security of the other one. So even if this new post-quantum algorithm turns out to be completely broken, then we still have classic security with an elliptic curve-based key exchange. And something very similar, basically with the same set of algorithms, is currently planned by Tor. This just a very quick note. There's this company D-Wave, which has built a quantum computer. Now, it's currently debated whether this can do anything at all faster than a classical computer. But what's absolutely clear is that this device cannot run Shor's algorithm. It's not a quantum computer in the sense of a generic quantum computer, but it's something very specialized. And this is interesting research, but whenever you read about the D-Wave quantum computer, you can think, okay, for cryptography, this doesn't matter because it cannot run these algorithms that can attack cryptography. Okay, and now, later in the program, you will find a talk about something called quantum cryptography, which is something different from post-quantum cryptography. And I want to use the rest of my talk to convince you to be very skeptical about what you will hear if you go to that talk later. First I want to clarify the words here because that's quite confusing. Quantum computers, quantum cryptography, post-quantum cryptography. So a quantum computer is a theoretical device that uses quantum physics to solve mathematical problems faster than a normal computer. And then there's post-quantum cryptography, which is cryptography that is secure even if you have an attacker with a quantum computer. And quantum cryptography is the idea of using physics to exchange keys. So you need to get the difference that like post-quantum cryptography is we're still using mathematical algorithms, just different ones. While quantum cryptography is we're basically moving from math to physics. The idea is that you have a kind of an encryption system where the claim is that it's secure based on the laws of physics. So as long as the laws of physics are true, and we are very confident that they are, then this is secure. And the basic structure of the idea is that you're sending single particles which encode some kind of information through polarization, and if an attacker would try to observe that, he would destroy their state. Therefore, if an attacker would try to surveil that, it would be noted. This approach has major problems, and I don't think it solves any problem. One limitation of that is that you have limited distances, because you need to send the particle over the whole distance. And if the distance gets too long, then you get too many errors and this no longer works. So we're maybe in the range of tens or hundreds of kilometers. Now, there may be people who say that this is good because then we can have intermediate stations where we re-encrypt stuff, and that's totally perfect for state surveillance. And I'm not making that up. This is from the EU Quantum Manifesto, where they say, okay, this can only function over distances up to 300 kilometers, and then we need some trusted nodes in between. The advantage of trusted node scheme is that they provide access for lawful interception. I don't agree with that, but some people think that this is an advantage. Another problem, this is not possible over wireless connections. So you won't have Wi-Fi with quantum cryptography, and you won't have mobile internet. And this is interesting because these people sometimes say they want to build a quantum internet. And I say, okay, you want to build an internet where I cannot have my mobile phone anymore? Where I cannot have Wi-Fi in my flat? I'm not sure. And also, it has a limitation of the distance, so I can no longer send emails to someone in the United States or in China, except if I have these trusted nodes in between. Yeah. I don't want that internet. And I think this is the major issue here. These these quantum, so the correct term for these quantum cryptography is quantum key distribution, and they need an authenticated channel. And they just assume that this authenticated channel is just there. Now, what does that mean? That means you somehow need some authentication scheme. So what you could do is you exchange a key before you do this. But then you could also just use symmetric cryptography, which is already secure against quantum computers. Or if you don't have a pre-shared key, you could use asymmetric cryptography. But then this is kind of circular, you understand, right? So they are trying to build something secure, but they already need something secure to build it upon. So yeah, this limitation, if you hear people talking about this, they often forget to mention that, but I think this is pretty significant. And this basically means that quantum key distribution is not a solution to attacks by quantum computers. And there's also these quantum key distribution devices are supposed to provide perfect security based on the laws of physics. But they get broken. And how is that possible? Do people break the laws of physics? The problem here is kind of between theory and practice. So these devices, these security claims are based on a theoretical model. And if you build a real device, it may not really follow that theoretical model. So there have been, for example, attacks where you can send a light flash through the wire, and the reflection would tell you the current setting of a filter, and you could break it by that. And that was just not part of their model of the system when they made a security proof. Yeah. And also you have to consider, if you have a software-based encryption system, if you have a bug, okay, that's bad. But you can fix it, and then you have an update. Hopefully you have an update, and then it's fixed. If you have a bug in your hardware encryption device, then you have to throw it away and buy a new one. So, yeah, this is also a practicality issue. So, yeah, quantum cryptography is extremely overhyped, and if you hear things like quantum internet, I think that doesn't make any sense. It's unclear which problem is going to be solved by it, and it is definitely not a solution to attacks by quantum computers. So that solution is post-quantum cryptography, is new cryptography with different algorithms. Yeah, so conclusion of my talk. Quantum computers may come pretty soon. They may not come at all. It's always difficult to try to predict the future. But anyway, we should be prepared for it. Post-quantum cryptography is the solution for it, but it's still in its early stages. And essentially, if you believe the predictions by some researchers about quantum computers, then we're already too late for that. And you should be very skeptical about overhyped claims about so-called quantum cryptography. Yeah. Here I have a few links with further information. There's the PQ Crypto webpage. There's also a regular conference about post-quantum cryptography. And from the recent ones, the videos are also on YouTube. There's EU research projects, which is run by Tanja Lange from the University of Eindhoven. And the NIST, which is the US Standardization Authority, they are currently in a process that they want to standardize post-quantum cryptography and are currently asking for opinions on how to do that. So something will be happening in that space. Yeah. That's it, and I'm open for questions.
Today my laptop is faster than the supercomputer, the fastest supercomputer in the world when I got my first computer. I probably could have seen that using Moore's law. I'm asking you, who will get a quantum computer? Will that be something that everyone will be able to have in their home? Or is there some physics that will say, no, normal people will never get this?
That's a good question, and I have cut it out due to time constraints. My answer to that is that okay, it's hard to predict what technology will be able to do in the future, but I don't think you will need a quantum computer at home. Because as it looks right now is that these computers can only solve very specific problems. So right now they can do things like factoring large numbers and simulating physics. This is not something I do every day. Like, this is something that's definitely interesting for research, and it's interesting to break cryptography, but it's not something that I need for, I don't know, video games or something like that. So I would doubt that there's a need for a quantum computer at home, even if you could build one.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I'm working on quantum technology myself. I think I do share actually a lot of your concerns about hype and overselling, including the hype of quantum cryptography. But I would also say some of those issues can be solved in the same way that you can build a quantum computer. In fact, something like a quantum repeater, which could increase the range of quantum cryptosystems, is a lot easier to build than a large-scale quantum computer. It's a much more realistic device. So there's a lot of things where there are actually already today very clear ideas of how to build such things. I think maybe a comment to your maybe ranting against the quantum internet. I kind of share that a little bit as well. I find it confusing. I know a lot of my colleagues are using that term. I don't myself. I think you should see that more as a research vision. I think you are making a very concrete, literal interpretation of what they mean. This is more part of a vision saying everything indicates that the future of quantum computing is going to be hybrid. It's going to be hybrid technologies because there's just no way you can cool down sufficiently big chips if they consist of, say, superconducting circuits. You need something to interface them, so you need a combination of nodes and links. And while that is not quite an internet, and that's why I do agree with your criticism, I think that's what they mean.
But still, even if you solve these problems like the range, you still have the question why you would need that in the first place. And I mean, this quantum internet, this is not the picture I made up, this is the picture I get from some media reports, and it's a picture I get from documents like the EU Quantum Manifesto. This overhyped idea that, yeah.
No, I do agree. I think you can easily misinterpret it. That's also why I think it's a bad term. I think a better term would be quantum networks.
Yeah, but even so, I think the fundamental question that has to be answered is what problem are you trying to solve with quantum key distribution? And I don't think that question has been answered.
I think you may be right to some extent, but I think you're also talking about attacks that are at a very fundamental level. I mean, if I should sort of bounce back the criticism, would every possible hardware today survive an attack where you're allowed to cut open a fiber and launch a bright laser pulse? I mean, we're talking about hardware level attacks, and I do agree with you. It's stupid to come and claim that this is protected by the laws of physics, because of course there's a piece of technology there, and you need to think about all kinds of scenarios. But it's just to say, with current communication protocols, if you cut the fibers and you launch a very bright laser pulse, what will that do to the hardware? Has this been thought out? I strongly doubt that all combinations of blinding pulses or blinding attacks have been considered, because you're also only considering, you could say, software attacks.
No, I mean, the general idea of cryptography is that you can communicate over an untrusted network. So what's happening on that network layer, that's basically the idea of cryptography, that you cannot trust it and everything can happen there. Well, I don't see how you would launch a,
No, but it would be a hardware level way of basically, blinding or temporarily destroying the communication hardware itself. I think that's just a very different thing than what's typically being considered. It's just to say it's a different level. And I think maybe one final comment I mean, it's true you need an authenticated channel, but I mean which means it's a public channel. And it's perfectly fine that it's public, but you need to be able to trust what you get. I guess that's what you mean.
And you need some technology to generate that trust, and that has to come from somewhere.
There's one more question from behind. Oh, maybe it's just gone away. Oh, somewhere over here.
Quantum computers have been a theoretical device for a long, long time. And we've known that what they could do to current cryptography for a long, long time. So the fact that we are all of a sudden within possible range is, of course, mind-boggling for most of us. Is there a next currently only theoretical device after the quantum computer which would ruin even post-quantum?
I'm not aware of that, but I mean, there's something very general about cryptography, and that is that we cannot prove that anything is secure. The only way to have security in cryptography is that we have this algorithm, we set a lot of researchers and say, try to attack this, and if they all fail, we think, okay, maybe it's secure. And that's, of course, also true for all post-quantum cryptosystems.
Okay. Thank you very much to Hannah Buch. Der er en pause nu fra frem til kl. 15.25, hvor man kan komme ind og høre dagens mand i skysovs, Christian Pansson, som har i den grad har været i medierne her i dag, og kommer endnu mere i medierne her.